The story of King Faisal bin Abdulaziz is not just the tale of a king, but the journey of a child who grew up in the desert sun, in the environment of tribal customs, the sound of galloping horses, and the centuries-old honor of the Arab land. A child who, from a very young age, witnessed times that even grown men would find hard to endure. But it was this very toughness that shaped a man who would later give the Muslim world a new direction. In the year 1906, when Faisal was born, the Arab world was a weak, scattered land entangled in tribal conflicts. The Ottoman Empire's grip was weakening. European powers had their eyes fixed on the Middle East, and on the land of Najd Abdulaziz bin Abdul Rahman al Saud was struggling to lay the foundation of a new state. Faisal opened his eyes in such an environment. Around him were the clanking of swords, the life of tents, the smoke of fires burning in cold nights, and the echo of Arab legends. Faisal's mother, Tarfa bint Abdullah, was a very strong, dignified, and wise woman. She maintained a certain strictness in Faisal's upbringing which was considered necessary for a prince. She told him that kingship is not the name of luxury, but the name of responsibility. She explained to him the meanings of Quranic verses, narrated the life of Prophet Muhammad, and told him that a good ruler bows before his people, stands with them, and understands their pains and sorrows. Faisal listened very attentively. This was the foundation that would later earn him respect across the world. In his childhood, Faisal witnessed political turmoil very closely. Abdulaziz bin Saud was trying to unite different regions of Arabia. Sometimes enmity with a tribe, sometimes a treaty, sometimes war, sometimes diplomacy. All of this happened before Faisal's eyes. Once Abdulaziz took Faisal with him to an important meeting. Faisal was still young, but he silently observed everything. He realized that power does not come from the sword alone, but also through words, wisdom, and making the right decisions at the right time. When Faisal reached about 10 years of age, a strange composure had already developed in his personality. Unlike ordinary children, he did not talk much, but when he did, his words carried weight. Along with innocence, a grown-up seriousness was visible on his face. His eyes carried a depth of thought, as if some continuous reflection was going on inside him. He began to understand the circumstances around him. He saw the effects of war, witnessed poverty, and saw the destruction caused by tribal conflicts. Abdulaziz had kept a close eye on his son's intelligence from the beginning. To make Faisal understand the importance of diplomacy, he began seating him in gatherings with tribal leaders at a very young age. Faisal often sat quietly and simply observed, but his observation was deep. He stored every conversation in his mind. Once a tribal chief said, "Faisal is still a child. What does he know about politics?" Abdulaziz smiled and replied, "He is silent, but he is learning the most." The chief was surprised. But time proved that Abdulaziz's assessment was correct. Soon after, Faisal faced a major test. He was sent to Turkey so he could closely observe the Ottoman court and the politics of the world. For a young prince, this journey was not easy. But Faisal not only accepted the challenge, he astonished everyone there. In his dress, manner, and speech, he was an Arab prince, yet his personality possessed an unusual dignity. He succeeded in gaining respect and honor for his country. When Faisal returned, the world in his eyes had changed. He had seen the outside world, large buildings, organized armies, modern systems, advanced states, but he had also seen that the Arab world was still far behind. He would think that if the Muslim world desired respect and progress, it needed strong leadership, discipline, education, and unity. This thought sparked a new passion within him. After the unification of Najd and Hejaz, when Abdulaziz first gave Faisal administrative responsibility in a major city, people were surprised to see how a young prince managed significant affairs. Faisal listened to people's conditions himself, resolved their problems, and kept his doors open at all times. His gentle tone, wisdom, and sense of justice won the hearts of the people. He used to say, "The people are not the ruler's power, rather the ruler is the power of his people." These were not ordinary words. They came from the depths of his heart. Once a severe water shortage hit the city, restlessness spread among the people. The situation deteriorated to the point where many families began to leave. Faisal assessed the situation and immediately ordered new wells to be dug, old reservoirs to be cleaned, and a system to store rainwater to be built. He visited the sites daily, spoke to workers, and listened to their hardships. His attitude earned deep respect in the hearts of the people. Someone said at the time, "We have seen many rulers, but never one who sat with us on the ground and listened to our problems." This was the same Faisal who would later stand tall among the world's greatest leaders. Time passed, and Faisal's responsibilities increased. His personality grew more mature than before. He thought deeply about every matter. His father Abdulaziz continued teaching him how to make difficult decisions. One day he told Faisal, "My son, ruling is not just giving orders. The real test of leadership is justice and fear of God." Faisal remembered this sentence for the rest of his life. As the Arab world changed, Faisal's role became increasingly important. He was becoming an example for the young Arabs, one who could carry tradition and modernity together. His thinking was like that of a desert prince, and also like that of a global leader. He understood the difficulties of his people, and his heart wished to change the destiny of this region. Faisal's life had reached a point where the innocence of childhood and the responsibility of youth had merged into one another. He was no longer just a child who observed, but had become an active part of the changing world around him. His mind was connected to the hardships of the wild desert, and also influenced by the progress of the outside world. This was the age where a person recognizes himself, and within Faisal this identity had already become clear. He wanted to become a servant, a dignified, and a far-sighted person. The unity of Najd and Hejaz was becoming stronger, but the state was still new, and internal challenges were many. Faisal was sent to different regions so that he could learn administrative affairs, understand the difficulties of the people, and recognize the weaknesses of the state system. Wherever he went, people felt that this young prince was not just the son of a ruler, but a human being like them, who thought seriously about their problems. His gentle speech and simplicity made him beloved by everyone. During his stay in Hejaz, Faisal faced a major crisis for the first time. A conflict between some tribes had intensified and the matter was about to turn into bloodshed. Abdulaziz sent Faisal there so that he could resolve the issue. This was a great test for him. He knew that even a small mistake could make the situation uncontrollable. Faisal gathered all the tribal chiefs in one place. He also met them individually, listened to their griefs and joys, and understood the real reasons behind their anger. There was a softness in his speech, but also an unusual dignity. During the meeting, a chief stood up angrily and said, "We want justice. We need what is right, not the might of the powerful." Faisal remained silent for a few moments, then said softly, "If justice is not achieved, states do not form, and if there is no peace, then justice itself does not remain. So we will first restore peace, and then justice will be completed." These words were deep, and their effect was immediate. The tribal chiefs became silent, and a few days later the agreement was settled. For the first time, Faisal stopped a major conflict without any war. This was a lesson for Faisal. He realized that the real meaning of power is not only to win wars, but to prevent wars as well. He had learned the same thing from his father, that a ruler's success is not measured by the number of his armies, but by his wisdom and justice. After this success, Faisal's confidence increased even more. He felt that he was truly capable of playing an important role. During this time, Faisal got another opportunity on the international level. He was sent on a tour of Europe so he could observe the political and diplomatic atmosphere of the world. It was the first time in that era that a young Arab prince got the opportunity to represent among global leaders. In the European capitals, Faisal not only raised the honor of his country but also astonished the world. He had come from a desert land, yet his manner, speech, and thinking were like those of highly cultured and educated people. During this tour, Faisal closely observed the power of the Western world. He saw how nations progress through education, discipline, law, and strong institutions. He realized that if the Arab world wanted to move forward, it too would have to adopt such principles. But he also saw that despite their progress, the West had become spiritually weak in many places. Faisal would think that if the Muslim world combined its spirituality, morals, and education, it could become the best nation in the world. When Faisal returned to his country, his thinking had become more mature than ever. Now his mind was clear about what he had to do for the future of his nation. He wanted the Arab world to be modern, but not lose its identity, to be strong, but not drift away from ethics. This balance was going to become the principle of his life. The state at that time was going through many challenges. New governments are often weak, and the surrounding conditions were also unstable. Along with his father, Faisal began participating in the development of various sectors. He considered education the most important. He believed that if the nation became educated, it would not remain behind anyone. That is why he advanced educational projects in different areas, and especially emphasized the training of the youth. One day, Faisal reached a small village school. There, some children were sitting on the ground writing on wooden boards. One of the children stood up upon seeing him and said, "Prince Faisal, can we also, when we grow up, serve the country like you?" Faisal smiled, sat on the ground beside the child, and said, "If you study with honesty and hard work, you will serve better than me." People remembered this incident for years. As time passed, the light of leadership within Faisal grew even stronger. People felt that this young man had a special charm. He was going to become a pillar of the future. In his personality, there was that quiet strength which great leaders possess, few words, but great impact. During this period, major changes were also taking place in global politics. Signs of a new war were emerging. Big countries were lining up against each other. The Arab world also had to prepare for the coming times. Faisal was observing the situation with deep attention. He understood that the world was changing, and the Arab world would also have to change. But how? He was slowly searching for the answer. Within Faisal was burning that fire, which exists only in those people who are born for a great purpose. The path to that purpose was now opening before him. A new responsibility now stood before Faisal, taking practical steps alongside his father, Abdulaziz bin Saud. In building the state, the energy of his youth had now merged with wisdom and experience to form a new strength. Faisal knew that gradually the hopes of not just one family, but the entire Ummah, were being placed on his shoulders. In the early years of the state, The biggest challenge was establishing discipline and a strong administrative system. According to desert traditions, every tribe acted independently, but now a nation was being formed. Faisal was sent to different regions for assessment. Wherever he went, he met the people, understood their needs, and then took direct action to resolve their problems. This approach made him unique among princes. Once he arrived in Medina, trade in the city was weak, water supply was problematic, and people complained that peace and security were no longer as they had been. Faisal spent several days in the city, walked the streets on foot, spoke to shopkeepers, and observed the conditions of the common people up close. He immediately gave new directives to the administration, ordered the repair of water reservoirs, and assigned additional patrols to safeguard the markets. Within a few weeks, conditions in Medina began to improve. People were amazed that such a young man could solve such a major issue so quickly. During this period, another major responsibility fell to Faisal: international diplomacy. Abdulaziz knew that in the future, Faisal would be the one to represent Saudi Arabia on the global stage because he possessed the dignity and confidence that commanded attention worldwide. Faisal was sent on special missions to different countries. Once, when he arrived in London, the newspapers wrote, "The son of a desert king, yet with a refinement that is rare even among Europe's great families." This was a new chapter in history. Faisal did not limit himself to meeting diplomatic officials. He also visited universities, institutions, and public places. He observed how the West was progressing, how laws brought order into their lives, and how education expanded their thinking. A question repeatedly arose in his mind: how could the Muslim world progress without education? This thought motivated him even more upon his return to his homeland. When he returned, he told Abdulaziz, "We must educate our youth, prepare them according to the needs of the modern era." Abdulaziz fully agreed with him. The first major educational initiative in the state began during this period, and Faisal was its driving spirit. He established schools in various regions, organized teacher training, and took small but significant steps toward women's education. It was a sensitive issue, but Faisal understood that a nation could not be strong until its women were educated. At the same time, another awareness grew within Faisal: the pain of the Muslim Ummah. The issue of Palestine was intensifying during this period. European powers were playing their political games, and conditions for Palestinian Muslims were becoming increasingly difficult. In Faisal's eyes, this was not merely a political issue but a moral and religious duty. He told his father that Saudi Arabia should take a firm stance on Palestine. Abdulaziz understood his passion and used to tell him, "The time will come, and then you will stand at the forefront for the Ummah." Faisal kept these words close to his heart. One night, standing on the roof of the Riyadh palace, he gazed at the sky. Strong winds blew across the desert night. Faisal wondered whether the Arab world could ever truly unite. Could Muslims regain their lost glory? These questions echoed in his mind. He knew that in the future he would have to craft policies that would bring the Ummah closer together, make it strong, and firmly stand against oppression. Over time, the depth of Faisal's decisions increased. He was learning both the paths of war and peace. He observed that the balance of power in the world was shifting. Some nations were emerging and gaining influence, while others were weakening. Faisal understood that the coming era would not be easy, and that Saudi Arabia would need strong leadership. He knew that one day this responsibility might fall on him. During this period, he received another important opportunity to participate in building the state's financial system. Faisal played an active role in stabilizing trade, increasing agricultural production, and creating an environment for foreign investment. He knew that no nation could progress without a strong economy. That is why he spent hours each day reviewing reports, maps, and accounts. One day, in a meeting, he said, "If we do not strengthen our economy, we will remain at the mercy of others." This statement symbolized that Faisal was not only addressing present issues, but also planning for the decades to come. Gradually, Faisal began attracting the attention of global leaders. His seriousness, insight, and calm yet firm demeanor earned him a distinguished position. People began to see him as the future of the Arab world. In every meeting, he delivered a message: Muslims must unite, focus on education and development, and base their society on justice. Life was leading him toward a crossroads, a point from which the course of his journey was destined to change forever. That morning in Riyadh was unlike any other. Faisal walked quietly in the vast courtyard of the palace, yet in his mind there was an unending pressure. He knew that times were changing, and now his role was about to become far more important. Global politics were rapidly shifting, unrest was growing in the Arab world, and the issue of Palestine was taking on a new shape. Faisal felt deep within that he would have to be prepared for a great test. Meanwhile, Abdulaziz bin Saud made a decision: Faisal was to be appointed foreign minister. This decision was not merely a position, but a message to the entire Ummah that Saudi Arabia would no longer remain silent in international affairs. When Faisal assumed this office, there was neither arrogance nor nervousness on his face, but a quiet strength. He knew that now he had to raise his voice for both his state and his Ummah. Upon taking charge of the ministry, he established one principle: dignity comes first in diplomacy. He wanted every conversation with other nations to be conducted on an equal footing. He often said, "Our country may be poor, but our honor can never be poor." These words left a deep impression on his colleagues. Faisal began visiting different countries. Wherever he went, people could not help but be impressed by his manner. He spoke in a gentle tone, yet his arguments carried such strength that even the most senior leaders stood in respect. London, Paris, Cairo, Damascus. Faisal's name quickly became known in the world's major capitals. Many leaders began to see him not merely as a minister, but as a future global statesman. During this period, the issue of Palestine had intensified. The Zionist movement was advancing with full force, supported by European powers. Palestinians were being displaced, lands were being seized, and the Arab world boiled with grief and anger. The fire in Faisal's heart had already been kindled. In his very first international conference, he delivered a powerful speech for the Palestinians that left the hall silent for several moments. Faisal said, "Palestine is not just a matter of land, it is a matter of justice. To deny a people their home is to deny their rights, and recognizing these rights is the first duty of humanity." These words were not only a beacon of hope for the Arab world, but also a reality check for the West. Many leaders remarked, "This young prince thinks beyond his time." Faisal's voice was heard with such power on the global stage for the first time. Within the state, Faisal's role was also expanding. He gave special attention to education, health, and infrastructure projects. His principle was that a nation's progress comes not merely from building structures, but from building minds. He often made surprise visits to schools and hospitals, spoke directly with staff, and identified weaknesses. His presence always brought calm and confidence. Once, in a remote village, he saw that people were sick, but medicines were unavailable at the local clinic. Faisal sat and listened to the villagers. An old man wept and said, "Son, there is a hospital, but no treatment." These words struck deeply in Faisal's heart. The next day, he summoned city leaders and ordered that a basic healthcare system be improved in every village. Within a few months, the situation began to change. People said, "Faisal doesn't just speak, he acts." This was why the people loved him sincerely. At the same time, global threats around Saudi Arabia were increasing. Signs of the Second World War were becoming evident. Great powers were lining up against each other. Faisal knew that if war broke out, its effects would spread across the entire Middle East. He wanted Saudi Arabia to remain distant from war, yet strengthen its defenses. He improved military training, border security, and the monitoring of key locations. One night, sitting among maps in his tent, he was deep in thought. He told an advisor, "The world is moving toward war, and we must be prepared. But we must also think about the generations to come. We must give them a nation that is both strong and peaceful." This conversation was a perfect example of his foresight. When the war began, Faisal's diplomacy ensured that Saudi Arabia remained neutral while gaining international significance. He fully understood the global importance of oil for the first time, and ensured that this resource was preserved and became the foundation for the nation's future. He understood that one day, this very oil would change the world's map. Faisal had now assumed a central role in both global politics and national development. People looked to him in every crisis. They knew that his heart was pure, and his decisions would always be in the nation's interest. He often said, "Muslims are never weak. Only those who abandon truth are weak." This was the guiding principle of his life. Throughout this period, Faisal's personality further matured, his eyes carried dignity, and his words carried the influence characteristic of future great leaders. He understood problems deeply, not superficially. He spoke like a friend, yet decided like a leader. The world watched him rise steadily. Life was now steering him toward another great journey, one that would change the course of his path forever. The morning sun, over Riyadh, heralded the arrival of a new era. The footsteps echoed through the silent corridors of the monarchy, and in those very corridors, King Faisal moved forward to begin his daily responsibilities. His face carried the same seriousness, dignity, and foresight that had now become the hallmark of the entire Islamic world. Yet, in those days, Faisal's priorities were expanding further. The world was changing, the balance of power was shifting, and while the West was rapidly adjusting its strategies, Muslim nations were beginning to feel a new wave of awakening. Faisal knew that the coming years would be decisive for Saudi Arabia. The country was modernizing, cities were rapidly developing, people's social needs were changing, and the world's eyes were fixed on its oil wealth. In such times, Faisal's role was not merely that of a king, but that of a leader whose decisions would shape the direction of the region. In this environment, King Faisal first focused on his state's education system. He understood that no nation could ever progress without education. For this reason, he ordered the establishment of new schools, colleges, and universities throughout the country. Particularly regarding girls' education, Faisal took steps that no one had dared to take before. There was criticism from society, some opposition, but Faisal knew that this change was essential for future generations. One day, while sitting with his cabinet, an advisor said, "Your Highness, opposition is growing regarding women's education. There have even been protests in some areas." Faisal calmly replied, "If we give in to fear today, this nation will never move forward. I want our daughters to have the same opportunities that other countries provide. A nation that leaves its women behind cannot progress itself." After this resolve, the establishment of new schools accelerated. The younger generation saw a new line of hope. People's minds began to change. This was a period when Saudi Arabia's social environment was turning in a new direction, and at the center of this change was King Faisal. But education was not his only priority. Faisal knew that oil was emerging as a new power in world politics. The United States, Europe, and international corporations had their eyes fixed on the wealth of the Middle East. In response, Faisal decided that Saudi Arabia itself should be the true owner of its wealth. He increased Saudi ownership in Aramco, revised company policies, and strengthened state control. This caused a stir in global markets. Western interests were affected, yet Faisal's focus remained solely on his country and his people. Meanwhile, the issue of Palestine was intensifying, since the Israeli occupation, grief, and anger were rising across the Arab world. Faisal's role in Arab leadership conferences became prominent. In every gathering, every meeting, he emphasized one point: Muslims are like one body. If oppression occurs in Palestine, its pain must be felt by all of us. His voice carried that pain and truth which silenced every leader present. Creating unity among Arab nations was no easy task. Yet Faisal worked tirelessly for it. Many meetings took place behind closed doors, yet their impact was felt worldwide. Faisal was fully aware of the weaknesses of the Arab world. He knew that as long as Muslims remained divided, no power would take them seriously. That is why he repeatedly said, "Strength lies in unity, and if we are not united, the world will never give us respect." Meanwhile, the West grew uneasy at Faisal's rising stature and influence. A Muslim leader who neither bows nor bargains nor fears, this was a new challenge for Western circles. Faisal's decisions were reshaping the global political map, sparking new debates over oil strategy, and prompting major powers, including the United States, to consider every step carefully. One night, Faisal sat at his desk reviewing global affairs, when a senior advisor said, "Your Highness, Western powers are not pleased with your policies. We must be cautious." Faisal smiled and replied, "I have made my decisions trusting in Allah. A nation that sells its principles has nothing left." Time passed, and Saudi Arabia grew stronger. During Faisal's reign, the country became not only economically stable, but also elevated in global politics. His actions had placed the state on a new platform. People began to see him not merely as a king, but as a reformer, a guide, and a courageous voice. Yet as the nation progressed, Faisal's challenges also grew. Some within internal circles were unhappy with his reforms, especially those who did not want the state to modernize, education to expand, or Saudi Arabia's role in global politics to strengthen. These voices began to rise in secret, but no one dared speak openly in Faisal's presence. At the same time, the Palestine issue was becoming increasingly critical. Arab states were moving toward a major decision, one that would change the course of history. Faisal understood that the coming period would be extremely important. He began holding significant consultations with his cabinet, religious scholars, and military leaders. In these meetings, Faisal's face carried the same seriousness that the sea shows before a great storm. The situation had now reached a turning point, where Faisal's foresight, courage, and leadership were about to be tested once again on the global stage, and this test was one whose impact would be felt across the entire world. The political landscape of the Middle East had reached a turning point where every decision had the potential to change the course of history. King Faisal knew that it was no longer just Saudi Arabia, but the entire Arab world that was moving toward a major test. Israel's aggression, the helplessness of the Palestinians, and the fragmented policies of the Arab states had brought the region to a point where silence was no longer an option. Faisal's nights had grown longer than ever before. He often stayed up late reviewing global reports, diplomatic communications, and military proposals. One evening, during a crucial meeting of Arab foreign ministers at the Riyadh Palace, Faisal listened calmly to everyone's words. The tension in the room was palpable, yet there was a steadiness in his voice that reassured the leaders. One minister said, "Your Majesty, if we do not take practical steps against Israel, the world will perceive Arab nations as weak." Faisal nodded and replied softly, "Strength is not in slogans, it is in unity. We must take measures that remind the enemy of his true place." Meanwhile, Faisal's eyes repeatedly fell upon images of Palestine destroyed homes, orphaned children, and wounded elders. These images ignited a fire in his heart. He knew that, as a Muslim leader, he could not remain indifferent to this suffering. Faisal's words from that time remain immortalized in history. "If we do not respond to the call of Jerusalem, our generations will never forgive us." It was during this period that a rare unity began to emerge in the Arab world. Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and other Arab countries were, for the first time, coordinating strategies against Israel with complete harmony. In every meeting, Faisal emphasized that this war was not merely a territorial dispute, but a matter of the honor of the entire Muslim Ummah. His voice carried a certainty that united the leaders. In this new era of the Arab Revolution, Faisal had become a symbol of political and moral leadership. Meanwhile, Western nations were deeply unsettled by Saudi Arabia's growing independence. The United States maintained constant communication, various diplomats arrived in Riyadh, and pressure was applied on Faisal to show flexibility. Yet Faisal's response remained consistent. "We stand for justice, and justice can never be secondary to convenience." One day, a special envoy of the U.S. president arrived to meet Faisal. Speaking gently, he said, "Your Majesty, the situation is delicate. We request Saudi cooperation. The world economy depends on stability." Faisal looked down at the floor for a moment, then raised his eyes directly to the envoy and said, "If the world's economy is built on oppression, it must change. We will act according to what our Sharia, our honor, and our responsibility demand." It was at that moment that the Western powers realized that King Faisal was not someone who could be pressured. He did not trade principles for convenience. He spoke only the truth. For this reason, Faisal became the brightest beacon of hope for Muslims worldwide. At home, Saudi Arabia was also undergoing a new wave of transformation. Faisal accelerated economic reforms. New roads, hospitals, electricity projects, and communication networks were rapidly established. The younger generation gained better employment opportunities. Faisal's vision was of a Saudi Arabia that was strong, educated, and self-reliant. However, as Faisal progressed, obstacles also multiplied. Some religious circles criticized modern reforms. Some business groups were unhappy with his economic strictness, and some external forces sought to undermine Saudi policies. Faisal would always say, "Every leader faces opposition, but if fear blocks the path, the destination is never reached." During these days, Faisal's greatest focus was strengthening Arab unity. A key meeting was held in Damascus, attended by top leaders from Syria and Egypt. Faisal spoke with utmost clarity, "Our individual strengths may be weak, but when we unite, the world cannot ignore us." His words deeply resonated with the audience. Gradually, the global political climate was shifting. Arab states were approaching a decisive moment, one that would shake the foundations of global powers. Faisal knew that whatever the outcome, history would never forget this turning point. He was ready for the coming storm, calm, yet resolute, silent yet strong, and above all, fearless. An unusual tension had now spread through the air. Every nation was accelerating military movements along its borders. The Arab world was silent but united. And within that silence, a decision was about to be made, one that would reshape politics for decades to come. The time had come. The decision was about to be made, a decision that would forever etch King Faisal's name into history. In the scorching political atmosphere of the Middle East, the hour had come, the hour whose echo would shake the entire world. Consultations among Arab leaders were intensifying moment by moment, pointing toward a decisive action. King Faisal was constantly in contact, sometimes in Cairo, sometimes in Damascus, and at times in Riyadh, holding critical meetings. The world knew something was about to happen, but no one could fully anticipate what. During those days, silence prevailed in the Riyadh palace. Apart from the sound of Faisal's footsteps and the hushed voices of his advisors, nothing else could be heard. Everyone knew that circumstances were no longer ordinary. One morning, after the Fajr prayer, Faisal was walking in the palace's vast gardens when his military advisor approached and said, "Your Majesty, the Arab armies are alert, ready, and morale is high. They await only your signal." Faisal, walking without pause, replied, "War is not fought with cannons alone. It is fought with faith. We stand for a sacred cause, but remember this. If unity falters, everything will collapse." It was on that day that the Arab world initiated one of the most significant military operations in its history against Israel. The armies of Egypt and Syria opened the fronts suddenly, shocking the world. Excitement surged through the Arab world. Yet more than anything, it was Saudi Arabia's decisive role that truly unsettled the global powers. Faisal had made up his mind. Oil would no longer be merely a commodity. It would become a weapon whose echo would make even superpowers tremble. A secret meeting was held in Riyadh where King Faisal made the historic declaration that shook the foundations of the global economy. He said, "We will halt oil exports until the Palestinian issue is resolved, until Israel withdraws from the occupied lands. The world will not receive our oil." These words struck everyone present like a flame. One advisor asked nervously, "Your Majesty, the West may be angered by this decision. Their economies will be affected." Faisal responded firmly, "If our nation bleeds and we remain silent, then we are unfit to lead. The world must know that Muslims do not abandon their brothers." It was the moment when King Faisal changed history. The oil embargo sent shockwaves across the globe. Western nations were thrown into turmoil. Their factories, economies, and budgets were under immense pressure. For the first time, the world witnessed a Muslim leader forcing superpowers to kneel before justice. Messages from the United States kept arriving, and diplomats reached Riyadh. Yet Faisal's response remained the same. "We stand for justice. Our position on Palestinian freedom will not change." At one point, the U.S. Secretary of State said, "We need your cooperation for global stability." Faisal replied without hesitation, "Until you stop supporting Israel and stand for justice, we cannot participate in your so-called global stability." Oil shortages deepened, global markets plunged into crisis, and Faisal's name dominated Western media. Some called him rigid, some saw him as a threat, but Muslims worldwide hailed him as a hero. Across Arab streets, people held his images and chanted slogans. Faisal had not just halted oil, he had given the Muslim Ummah a new identity. Meanwhile, Faisal's role among the Arab nations remained pivotal. He repeatedly emphasized, "Our strength lies not in the enemy's weakness, but in our unity." His secret meetings with the leaders of Syria and Egypt strengthened the strategic planning of the war. Although the battlefield had its challenges, the political power of the Muslim world had become unmatched. One night, after a long government session, Faisal returned to his room. He was exhausted, yet his eyes reflected a profound sense of peace. Looking out of the window, the Saudi sky appeared tranquil. He softly whispered, "O Allah, if any of my actions are for you, accept them. I have fulfilled my duty. The rest is in your hands." Days passed, yet Faisal's popularity continued to rise. The world now recognized him as a leader who had sent a clear message to the West. The Arab world would no longer remain silent. Political analysts everywhere stated that this single decision had reshaped the global balance of power. But as King Faisal's fame grew, so did the unease of his opponents. Several global powers were quietly mobilizing. Some Arab rulers were uneasy with his strength. Whispers of conspiracies began to circulate within domestic circles. Faisal knew he was walking a path filled with immense danger, yet fear and retreat were not in his nature. He would often say, "One who stands for truth does not fear the outcome." Now, the brave leader of the Muslim world was approaching a crossroads where politics, loyalty, enmity, and intrigue all intertwined. History was preparing a new chapter, and King Faisal was to be its central figure. Every day of King Faisal's life had become a test. The swift winds of global politics and the heavy responsibilities of internal affairs pressed upon his shoulders, yet he never wavered. He knew that his decisions would not only determine the future of Saudi Arabia, but also shape the destiny of the entire Arab world. During this period, a crucial meeting was held in Riyadh, drawing the eyes of the world. Throughout the session, King Faisal repeatedly emphasized that only unity, determination, and adherence to principles could safeguard the Arab world. He said, "We must make decisions for our homeland, our people, and our ummah that will be remembered in history." Fear has never elevated a nation. His words resonated deeply in the hearts of all present. Policies were being formed, plans were taking shape, yet Faisal's greatest challenge remained the internal forces resistant to his reforms. Some traditional factions wanted the country's progress to move slowly. Others wished for Saudi Arabia to act cautiously in global politics. Yet Faisal never let these obstacles hinder his policies. He would often say, "The path of righteousness is never easy, but it must be walked." During this period, the training of the Saudi military and investment in modern technology were rapidly expanded. Faisal understood that peace could only be guaranteed through a strong defense. Not only did he procure new weapons, but he also ensured that officers received advanced training. All this was taking place while Israeli aggression was rising in the region, and Western powers sought at every moment to weaken Arab unity. One day, Faisal received a confidential report indicating that some Arab rulers, under Western pressure, were softening their stance on Palestine. Faisal immediately convened a meeting. In a firm tone, he declared, "We can never compromise on our principles. Palestine is not merely a piece of land, it represents the honor of the Ummah. If we yield under pressure today, future generations will never forgive us." There was a truth and dignity in Faisal's voice that could halt any debate. The assembly of leaders fell silent and, accepting his words, agreed to revise their policies. It was a defining moment when King Faisal's leadership became exemplary, not just for Saudi Arabia, but for the entire Arab world. Meanwhile, Saudi society was progressing rapidly. New universities, schools, hospitals, and infrastructure projects were continually established. A wave of hope spread among the people. The younger generation realized that a leader is not measured by words alone, but by action. Faisal frequently attended inaugurations of schools, hospitals, and modern projects, speaking directly with the people and listening to their concerns. Western powers were uneasy with Saudi Arabia's growing strength. The United States and European nations continuously applied pressure, yet Faisal's principles never wavered. He often stated, "The honor and principles of our nation are never for sale." These principles fortified him in every challenging situation. At the same time, the situation in Palestine worsened. Israeli occupation intensified, and the condition of the Palestinian people grew increasingly dire. Faisal's eyes followed every report closely. He knew this was not merely a political matter, but also a moral duty. He repeatedly reminded Arab leaders, "Our responsibility is not confined to our country. It extends to every member of the Ummah globally." Faisal's influence and popularity were growing. His speeches, decisions, policies, and principles were being heard and understood across the world. People began to see him as a leader who was not only advancing national development, but also awakening the consciousness of the Ummah. During these days, King Faisal's personality reflected a remarkable balance of firmness and compassion. He remained steadfast in his principles, yet he felt the joys and sorrows of the people closely. These qualities made him an exemplary leader. Days passed, yet Faisal's foresight, courage, and adherence to principles began propelling Saudi Arabia toward a new height. He knew challenges were far from over, but the nation now had a strong and brave leader, capable of rising successfully to every test. History was preparing a new chapter, and King Faisal was at its center, a chapter whose story would be told 2 generations to come. As the days passed, King Faisal's responsibilities continued to grow. The complexities of global politics and the demands of internal reforms were moving in tandem. Faisal understood that every moment was decisive, and that his decisions would not only shape Saudi Arabia but set an example for the entire Arab world. During this period, the situation in Palestine remained tense. Israeli occupation had created divisions among Arab nations. Some countries, under pressure, considered adopting a softer stance. But King Faisal's principles were clear and uncompromising. Without justice, there can be no peace. This unwavering conviction allowed him to stand firm in every meeting. A special session was held in Riyadh attended by all senior advisors and ministers. Faisal spoke with clarity and authority. Our policies will always be guided by principles. Those who question our principles must remember we do not yield to fear. Following his address, all present pledged their full support. Meanwhile, domestic reforms were progressing rapidly. Faisal expanded programs in education, healthcare, infrastructure, and the empowerment of women. New policies were introduced to create employment opportunities for the youth. The quality of education in schools was elevated. Hospitals were equipped with modern technology and trained staff, and a new wave of hope swept through the nation. At the same time, global powers grew uneasy with Saudi Arabia's rising influence. The United States, European nations, and other international players continually sought to exert pressure. Yet Faisal never wavered. He would often say, "The honor and principles of our nation are never for sale." This steadfastness strengthened Saudi Arabia, transforming it into a strong, self-reliant, and globally respected state. One day, Faisal came across a report detailing the plight of Palestinian children, the destruction of homes, and the severe disruption of education. A profound sense of pain stirred within him. He immediately reached out to Arab nations and said, "We must act for the future of these children. Raising our voice against injustice is our duty." The announcement became major news across the Arab world and international media. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's military modernization continued. Faisal knew that without national security, reforms and development could not succeed. He increased military exercises, enhanced officer training, and strengthened border surveillance. King Faisal's personality had developed a remarkable balance in yielding in principles, yet deeply empathetic to the people's suffering. This combination made him an exemplary leader. His respect and admiration among the public continued to grow. Days passed, but the Palestinian crisis and global pressures continued to mount. Faisal was acutely aware that the coming period would be highly sensitive, and that every decision would leave a permanent mark on history. He maintained ongoing consultations with his cabinet, military strategists, and Arab leaders. The eyes of the entire Muslim world were now fixed on King Faisal. Everyone awaited his next move. History was approaching a new turning point, and King Faisal stood at its center. Every action, decision, and statement had become a beacon of hope for the entire Ummah. This period of King Faisal's life had become one of the most significant chapters in history. Despite internal and external challenges, his leadership transformed Saudi Arabia into a strong, independent, and globally respected state. At every step, he remained steadfast in his principles, and his decisions proved to be guiding examples not just for his country, but for the entire Arab world. Faisal's stance on the Palestinian issue was so resolute that even global powers were compelled to respect his determination. He often declared, "Without justice, there can be no peace." Upholding this principle, he strengthened Arab unity and became the voice of the Muslim Ummah. His actions sent a clear message to the world. Muslims can remain independent and dignified while asserting their rights. Meanwhile, internal development in Saudi Arabia progressed rapidly. New schools, hospitals, roads, and universities were established. Employment opportunities for the youth increased. Women's education expanded, and social reforms continued unabated. A wave of hope and confidence swept across the population. On the global stage, King Faisal's stature grew steadily. His diplomatic skill, foresight, and adherence to principles earned him a prominent place among world leaders. People began to see him not merely as a king, but as a global statesman who prioritized justice, honor, and integrity above all. At the same time, Faisal played a pivotal role in global oil policies. He took a firm stance on oil strategies until the Palestinian issue was addressed, and this decision had profound effects on the world economy. For the first time, Western nations witnessed a Muslim leader standing for justice and principles, maintaining his position despite international pressure. A defining aspect of King Faisal's leadership was his foresight. He not only understood current challenges, but also planned for the future. His policies in military strength, education, healthcare, infrastructure, and economic development laid the foundation for long-term progress. His principles and determination built Saudi Arabia into a strong, thriving nation, while his reputation in the Muslim world became a shining example. The love and respect of the people grew because they recognized that their leader worked sincerely not only for his country, but also for the broader Muslim Ummah. This era of King Faisal's life demonstrates that a principled, just, and visionary leader can change the destiny of a nation. His decisions, actions, and leadership remain a source of guidance for the Muslim world. He was a leader of a time that, despite oppression, pressure, and challenges, carved a historic path for his people and the Ummah. Ultimately, King Faisal's story became an enduring example for generations. A young prince, through principles, courage, and determination, won the hopes of an entire Ummah and made Saudi Arabia a strong and respected nation. On the global stage, this is a story of leadership, vision, and justice forever remembered under the name of King Faisal.